Great to be joined here on Flow FM at the start of the schooling year in South Australia by the Education Minister, Blair Boyer. Minister, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ricky.
And look, there's all sorts of feelings and emotions, especially for kids starting school or starting at a new school this year. What's your message for all the kids getting underway in 2023?
It's always an emotional time, for students and parents, particularly parents who might be sending off their little one to reception for the first time. I know that can be an emotional day, and I wish those parents and those young kids on their first day of school all the best. For the rest of South Australian students going back on Monday, on the 30th of January, I know we've had a really disruptive 3 years because of COVID. It's caused a lot of headaches for staff and for students in terms of disrupting learning, and there's been students who've missed out on a lot of those important rites of passage events because of the disruption caused by COVID. I'm really hopeful that what we have in 2023 is a school year much more like the ones we remember before the pandemic, for both students and staff too. I know have had a really tough few years and are feeling a bit fatigued. I hope they've had some time away and a break and a chance to recharge. But looking forward to a really positive 2023, and I wish all those people going back or starting on their first day all the best. And I hope there aren't too many damp eyes from parents when they farewell them at the school gate.
Good point. Now, Minister, on the checklist for parents getting their kids ready for school, will mobile phones be on the checklist or not? There was a promise during the election campaign that they would be banned, or is there more detail to the policy?
So that's right, Ricky, before the state election. In fact, I think the commitment was made by Peter Malinowskis in 2019 when we were in opposition to ban mobile phones in high schools if we were lucky enough to form government, which we were last year. We're now bringing that ban into effect. It will be rolled out across the entire public high school system from term 3, but some schools are starting from term 1. That's a decision they're making locally about starting a bit earlier, but the ban will be there across the entire public high school system from term 3. I am completely resolved to put this in place, and I've got to say that with every new school I visit, every new parent I speak to, every new principal and classroom teacher I speak to, I am more convinced that this is the right thing to do. We know that phones contribute in no small way to inattention and distraction from kids' learning, but also bullying and harassment in the classroom and in the schoolyard as well. And I think some of that school violence we see too is contributed to by mobile phones. You see bystanders there holding their phone up, egging on the perpetrator so they can get some juicy footage to put on their social media page with you. So, yes, we are getting on with it. We've done almost a year of consultation now, really, and pleasingly have the support of Secondary Principals Association and the union now for the policy.
Well, when it comes to that policy, the opposition claims they've had a read of it and they believe there's so many exemptions that it could hardly be described as a ban, including an exemption a student could use a phone if it was to support their well-being. Are there a lot of holes in this ban?
No, there's not. Listen, I think this is just a case of the former minister and the former government who did put a ban in place for primary schools, which I have to say is a good thing. But then I think they looked at high schools where we have the real issue with mobile phones and thought, that's a bit tricky. I'll put that in the too hard basket. They squibbed that one. Well, I'm not going to be the minister who looks away from the kind of issues that mobile phones cause. And that's why we made the commitment. That's why we're putting it into place. There will be appropriate exemptions, as you would expect. And I can tell you, we were contacted early in the piece by parents who wanted to check that, if their kid had, and we're talking about well-being, if the kid had a legitimate reason why they might need to access their phone during the day, that would be there. But it is a ban otherwise. It is a ban, from having that phone on and in their possession from the start of the school day to the end of the school day, and that includes recess and lunchtime.
And in a practical sense, is it a case where an exemption can be applied by a particular teacher in a particular class, or is it got to be something that's sort of signed off by the school?
Well, we've always make sure there's enough scope in our policy so that local schools can make decisions or have a bit of latitude to make decisions around what fits best for them. Keeping in mind that different schools will have different ways of enforcing the ban. Some will ask kids to put it in lockers for the whole day. Some schools will use the magnetic pouches that the phone has to be put in and then it is locked. So we need to make sure that there is scope for individual student circumstances where a school can say, okay, we think there is a legitimate reason here why you might need to access it. That's what you'd expect from all the policies across the education system. But that doesn't mean it's not a ban. It is absolutely a ban. And unless you have a very, very good reason to be able to need your phone, it has to be off or on airplane mode and away from the start of school, the first bell, to the end of school and the last bell.
A great many of those listening would be listening as parents of kids that go to government schools, but how does the policy apply, if anything, in the non-government sector?
So the non-government sector will be responsible, Ricky, for making their own decisions around that. I know some of those schools already do have bans in place, but that is a decision for them to make. I have no doubt they'll be watching closely to see how the ban goes in the public system this year, but I can tell you that we are of one mind across the public, independent and Catholic systems in terms of, the pitfalls of mobile phones, in terms of the bullying that can occur on social media. And I was reflecting just earlier today, Ricky, on when I went to school, and you might be of a similar vintage to me. There was bullying, of course, always at school. It's just a sad fact, but kids could often retreat to the sanctuary of their home and family and get away from it at night. You can't do that anymore. Kids who are being bullied using smart devices and social media are faced with that bullying during the day, when they go home, on weekends. The effect it's having on kids' mental health and their state of mind and well-being is really, really significant. And I just don't accept that there's not a role for government to play here by stepping in and actually doing something about it. It's what I see as my job as the minister.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that point that you can't get away from that bullying. It was a point made by Police Officer of the Year Mark Cyrus, who volunteers his time with Operation Flinders, said exactly that, is the challenges on these kids is that they cannot escape cyberbullying because it's going around the clock in some cases. There's even television commercials reinforcing that that's what's going on.
Exactly right. And, we had one of the things that shocked me, Ricky, when I became minister was some of the evidence that I'd seen around kids of a primary school age with suicidal ideation. I mean, that both as minister but as the father of 3 primary age kids, daughters, I've got to be honest, that really freaked me out to think that kids of that age were thinking about taking their own lives. And it's because they can't get away from this negative stuff that's being directed towards them in a lot of cases on social media. And just as a society, as an education system, as a government, got to do something about it. There might be some bumps on the way. It won't be easy, but just because it's not easy doesn't mean we should put it in the too hard basket and squib it. Got to make it work.
Well, got to agree with that sentiment, hoping for a bullying-free but also a more normal-looking 2023 school year. State Education Minister Blair Boyer, thanks so much for joining us today on Flow.
Good on you. Good on you, Ricky.